Getting people in. Hey, Lauren. Long time no see. Okay, if you guys could type in the chat box where you're located, that would be very helpful for the speaker, just to get an idea of where people are from. We got one from Ohio, from Florida, I know. We're gonna wait a couple of minutes since we were late opening it to see if any stragglers come in. Oh, Lauren's gonna claim Gainesville, are you? God, I missed you guys. Anybody else want to let us know where you're from? We're gonna wait just one more minute, see if we have any last minute stragglers coming in. While we're waiting for last minute stragglers, I will introduce myself. First, make sure this thing is recording. Yes, it is. My name's Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I'm at the University of Kentucky. Technical term I get, our official definition of my position is poultry extension project manager. As part of my responsibilities, I coordinate the small and backyard flocks webinars that are held monthly. We've been doing this for quite some time now, so they're all recorded as this is, and the recordings are available for later viewing, so you can view any of our past webinars. And as I said, we've been doing this for quite a few years, and we have quite a few still booked for the rest of the year. This month's webinar is going to be on, who are we hearing from? Getting feedback. Okay. This month's webinar is on incubating and hatching waterfowl eggs. Last month, we had a webinar on managing an incubator in general with Ron Keene from University of Wisconsin. And today we have Brett Kreffels from Nebraska, who's going to specifically talk about waterfowl eggs, since they are cared for slightly different compared to chicken or turkey eggs. If during the webinar you have any questions, feel free to either type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring those. I will be on mute. My video will be turned off, and I will be monitoring questions. If the question is a clarification of something that Brett is talking about at the time, I will turn on my video and my unmute my microphone and ask for the clarification. Otherwise, we'll hold all the questions for the end. If you are like me and will forget a question, if you don't get it down right away, feel free to type it in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I will make sure that we answer all the questions at the end. So I'll turn it over to Brett, who will be presenting today. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. It's all yours, Brett.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Brett Kreffels. I am with Nebraska Extension, which is part of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln system. And I'm in the Douglas and Sarpy County area. So that is Omaha area. I raise waterfowl. I have ducks and geese of my own that I show and sell and do all that kind of stuff. So we're going to go through and talk about incubating and hatching waterfowl eggs. Like Jackie said, they are a little bit different than our chickens or turkeys or any other fowl. Just for the requirements. So we'll get right down to it here. Hopefully it goes, there we go. So a couple things we'll talk about today, egg collection and storage, how we set the eggs in the incubators, incubation process, hatching, and then just a few incubation problems. Again, these ones are kind of similar to chickens, but they're a little bit different in terms of how we manage them. So we'll go to the duck and goose eggs. So here's what I like to say about hatching ducks and geese. It's really an art as it is in science. If you talk to a waterfowl guy, every single one will have a different take on how do we incubate and hatch waterfowl eggs. Some guys will take water out of the picture. They won't put any water in the incubator up until the last 4 or 3 days of incubation. Some guys will just load the incubator up with water and high humidity the whole time. It's just, it's whatever they kind of figure out works for them. And I found that certain parts of the country are a little bit different in terms of humidity and temperature and the house that they got them in, or where the humidity there. So everyone's different, but we're going to go through and kind of do some of the basics, what you might expect when you put your eggs in the incubator. So collecting eggs and storing them. So really what you want to do is collect the eggs every single day. This is same thing with chickens. You want to collect them every day. If you don't, you get a collection of eggs, you might have a goose that goes broody or a duck that goes broody. There's always been this thing around not cleaning duck and goose eggs. And the reason for that is because you don't want to wash away that bloom or that waxy outer covering that the female puts on when she lays the eggs. However, I do recommend, if they do have some manure on them or some dirt, you can lightly wash them off, lightly brush them off. It's not going to hurt it too bad. Obviously that bloom is used to protect the egg from any bacteria getting in, as well as kind of help with humidity. But I would recommend that you do take some of that manure or dirt off. Another thing I do, I just thought of too, and I forgot to put this in here, is I will actually fumigate my eggs. Use a product called Tektrol, which is approved for incubation and sanitizing eggs essentially. And I'll do that to get rid of the bacteria on the outside of the egg, which is a good idea. If you do store the eggs for a longer period of time, you want to do it on the side. Don't ever put the pointy end down. Or sorry, the big end of the egg down where the air cell is. Always point down or on the sides. And if you do store them for a while, it's a good idea to rotate those eggs maybe once or twice a day, just kind of keep everything in place. Ideally, you want to store them about 55 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to turn them daily. 2 weeks is about the max of when your eggs, your embryos in there are viable and could start to develop. After about 2 weeks, things kind of try to taper off. So when I have my waterfowl eggs, I typically like to set about once a week, just to maximize that hatchability and the development of those embryos. Chickens are the same exact way. I can flub a little bit on this storage temperature. I know my house is a little warmer than 65 degrees, but in general, if you can keep them about that temperature, that would work great. Okay. So let's talk about setting the eggs. So most commercial incubators, I'll say the big ones like the GQFs and those, it's really hard to set eggs in those without putting the point end down. Okay. However, it has been shown that in incubating waterfowl eggs, it's best to put them on their side, and either hand turn them or have an automatic turner do it for you. If you do put them in a GQF, what I've done is had turkey, what do you call them? Turkey flats. And I put the eggs on the side, on their side. And that actually works really well, especially for those smaller duck eggs. Goose eggs typically need to be put in an incubator where their sides are down totally. Just really hard to put them in those flats. Add water to the incubator. So if you look here, that top picture there is from a still air incubator or a forced air incubator. You can see the 4 wells there. So what I like to do is typically fill up usually the first 2. In this case, I guess it doesn't really matter, but wells 1 and 2. And then once you get to the latter stages of incubation, then you can fill up 3 and 4. But it kind of depends on the humidity system that you use. So if you have a styrofoam incubator, you buy off the GQF incubators, or you buy Tractor Supply, Baumgart's, or any other farm supply store, they'll have this type of humidity system. Whereas in my big incubator, and this is an example of one I have, I don't really use it for the ducks and geese, but you have this automatic system here, which is really handy because you can fill that bucket up, and there's a reservoir here and an evaporative pad. You can actually fill that and let it go for a while and have to keep filling it. Whereas you really got to monitor this type of well system for humidity, just because they do try to dry out a little bit faster. Okay, but it kind of just depends on your incubator and what you've got available. All right, so when you're thinking of incubators, you have a couple options here. You have what's called a forced air incubator and a still air incubator. There's pros and cons to both. I've hatched ducks and geese in both of these. But a forced air incubator, this uses a fan that circulates the heat within the incubator. So right up here, you can see the coils. These coils here are what produces the heat, and this fan circulates the air. So with this, you've got even heating, better temperature control throughout the entire incubator. However, kind of mentioned in the last slide, your evaporation rate goes up because you're constantly circulating that warm air. So you're going to have a higher humidity evaporation rate. Okay, so in terms of ducks and geese, that's okay, but you really got to watch the last few days of incubation because that's when the humidity requirements are higher. Okay, so you can buy it forced air or you can buy still air, and I use these as well. No fan, so the air kind of needs to come in through the vents. Sort of right here, and that little red plug is also a vent too. So you have a lower rate of evaporation because you don't have that hot air being circulated constantly. Okay, but you need to closely monitor the egg temperature because you don't have a better temperature control with this type of system. So what I like to do is I like to place an incubator right at thermometer right at about egg height or even mid egg height. And that gives you a good temperature reading for that egg. Try not to put that thermometer right on the wire, right down here, because it's always going to be a little bit cooler. Don't try to put it up too high because then you're going to get a false reading because it's going to be closer to the heating coil. So right around mid egg height is a perfect spot to kind of measure and evaluate the temperature of that egg. Okay. These are really easy. These two types of incubators are really easy to control the temperature from the thermostat point of view. A lot of them now, I know ones we buy here at our office for our embryology program are all digital. They read temperature and they give you the humidity, which is really, really nice. So if you can get one of those, that'd be great. They come both in the still air and the forced air system. Okay. I also, from a humidity standpoint, I also kind of like the styrofoam ones because they do hold the humidity a little bit better than some of your others. I know a couple guys, thinking of incubators, love the old redwood type incubators. The old style ones, they hold humidity really, really well. Also very, very, very expensive. So, all right, let's talk about incubation. Okay, so most ducks, I'll say most domestic ducks are going to be around that 22 days incubation period. Muscovy ducks, which are a wild duck, they're from a wild duck. They're actually considered more goose than they are duck. They're about 35 days of incubation. And geese are a little bit different. It kind of depends on the breed. For instance, I have tufted Roman geese, and they're almost dead right on 28 days of incubation, like a regular duck. Whereas some of your larger geese, your Toulouse, your Africans, your Emdens, they're going to be closer to that 32, 35 day. So it kind of depends on the breed with those, but so you have a range. And then I shoved swans in here because we do have some people that raise swans, and they are considered waterfowl, and they're about that 35 to 41 days of incubation. The temperature is very important. Same with the chicken. Their ideal temperature during the incubation phase is around 100 degrees, 99.5 degrees. But when they get to be that last 3 or 4 days of incubation, where they get into the hatching phase, you typically want to cool that down to about 98.5 degrees, give or take. There's a little bit of leeway, but 98.5 degrees is a good point. And a lot of guys do this. I recommend it. I do it. Is cool the eggs. Now that seems a little bit counterintuitive of what we're always taught with eggs, is to keep them in the incubator, keep the incubator shut, get in there, turn the eggs if we have to, add more water, and shut it right back up. However, the waterfowl eggs do really, or respond really well to that cooling period. And the reason why is, you think of if a goose was sitting on eggs or a duck was sitting on eggs, what she would do is she'd get up and she would go find food or water, and she'd go for a swim and do her business, right? So she covers the eggs up and those eggs cool for a little while. So studies have shown that that cooling process of that egg actually increases hatchability. So I usually leave the incubators open. If I'm turning and I'm adding water, I usually leave them open for about 5 minutes is all, just so they can cool down. Now we do not do this last few days of incubation. This is during the incubation phase, the day 1 to day 24, we'll say. The last 3 or 4 days, we do not do this. We keep the incubator shut, add plenty of water and humidity in there, and that's what we do. Like, but don't be afraid to cool those eggs down. They like it. Humidity. So there's a couple ways to measure humidity. We can do it by relative humidity, using a hygrometer to determine humidity. So this is when you listen to the weather forecaster, they talk about relative humidity outside. This is what they're referring to, is using a hygrometer to measure the relative humidity percentage in the air. Or we can do the old tried and true way, is using a wet bulb. So this is using water that's coming in contact with a regular old thermometer, and we can look at the lower temperature of that thermometer based on the actual incubation temperature in there, and you're going to get a lower temperature, and that's going to help us determine wet bulb humidity levels. So the next slide here kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like. So in our incubation phase, we want that humidity level to be about 55 to 58%. So for ducks, usually about day 1 to day 24 is where we want this. And then geese, day 1 to 26. Again, it's breed dependent. So for my tufted Roman geese, I'll do that 1 to 24 because I know that they hatch on the 28th day. Okay. For hatching, though, we really want to crank that humidity up. And the reason why we do that is these ducks and geese require that high humidity to prevent any of that shell membrane sticking to our babies. It helps them orient themselves within the egg, and you really got to crank it up. So for hatching, day 25 to 28 for ducks, and day 26 to 35 for geese. Okay, how do we do this? So what you could do is, what I like to do is put water in the bottom of the incubator, which is great, but also add another water source. So that might be a bowl with a sponge in it. Sometimes I'll just use a bowl with paper towel that's exposed to the air. So it helps with that evaporative cooling or evaporation and get more humidity in there. But another thing to do is spray the eggs. Take a regular old spray bottle, fill it with lukewarm water, or keep it in the incubator if it's big enough. Spray the eggs after about day 10. I typically do this every time I rotate the eggs. Every time I turn the eggs about 3 times a day, I'll give them a quick spray. That in itself is going to increase the humidity level, and it will improve your hatch. So last thing before I move on to the next slide here is you can see the humidity wet bulb temperatures that you'll need. So at 86 degrees Fahrenheit should be your incubation wet bulb temp. And you can just see this is just it can be as simple as a shoestring tied around that end of that thermometer and dipped in water. Easy way to measure the wet bulb temperature. Hatching is going to be about 94 degrees. Okay. Here's another way that we can determine the proper humidity levels, and that is going to be the change in air cell size. So that egg should lose between 13 and 18% of its weight during incubation. So what you can do is you can physically mark at certain days of incubation where that air cell size is. And so we need that loss of water, right, in order for that baby duck or goose to get out. Okay, something really easy to do. Monitor that air cell size. If it's not humid enough, then you're going to get less evaporation, so the air cell size isn't really going to be very big. Okay, we need it to be big enough for that baby duck and goose to get a good old gulp of air and start to get out of that egg. Turning. So turning is very important, not only for chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, whatever, but it's especially beneficial for ducks and geese. We need to rotate that egg at least 3 times a day. Some guys will say more than 3 times a day, but typically all we have time for is 3, and that works out just fine. I mentioned earlier, place the eggs on their side, mark it with an X and an O. That way you know when they've been turned when. Again, if you have an automatic egg turner that supports duck and goose eggs, you obviously don't need to do this. But for those of us that have just a regular styrofoam incubator that have to turn manually, this is a good way to do that. You turn 3 times a day up until about day 24 to 26, when we start to enter the hatching phase. At that point in time, that's when we go into what's called, we like to affectionately call lockdown, right? So you're going to make sure those eggs are gone through that final turn, plenty of water for humidity, and then you leave the incubator shut. The only time you open it up is to add more water. Okay. Inadequate turning can cause malposition during hatching. So the normal position for a duck and goose, and even a chicken, is to have head towards the air cell. Sometimes when we have inadequate turning, that duck and goose starts to pip out towards the top end of the egg, or the pointy end of the egg, which results in not having enough air down there, that big old gulp of air. So sometimes you can get problems with that. A lot of times ducks and geese, if they're strong enough, the humidity is correct, temperature is correct, they can usually get out of a malpositioned egg. But I just had one the other day that did the exact same thing, and I had to help them out. So typically when you help out a duck or goose, it doesn't matter if it's duck or goose, chicken or turkey, usually not a good outcome. Okay? So to avoid that, proper turning at least 3 times a day is a must. All right, so hatching, arguably the most critical time in order to get this baby duck, baby goose, baby swan, whatever it is, out. So we talked about it again. You need to increase your humidity level from 55 to 80%. Add more water, add evaporative pads, adjust your automatic humidity controls, whatever you need to do to increase that humidity to at least 75, 80%. Again, this is lockdown time. So add as much water as you possibly can at this point, and then leave the incubator shut. So I'll go back to, with mine, I've got the bottoms of those wells all filled up as far as I can go. And then, like I said, I add a bowl with just, it really is just paper towels in there that's exposed to the air to help with that humidity increase. And that seems to work really well for me. Okay. But I know they have those commercial evaporative pads that work well too. So whatever you can use to increase that humidity is totally fine. So you've done everything right. You've got the humidity correct. You have the temperatures correct. Now we got hatching ducklings and goslings or cygnets. Only remove them when they're dry and walking. We usually get a tendency to, as soon as they're dry, take them out of the incubator. Well, you think about with this process and the requirements for a duck and goose to get out of the egg at a high humidity level, every time you open up the incubator, what leaves? Humidity and heat. So for those goslings or ducklings that haven't hatched out yet, this can be a problem. We're going to get too dry of environment. The shell membranes are going to get too sticky. They're going to stick to the gosling and the duckling, and then we're going to have some problems getting out. So wait till they're dry, wait till they're walking, wait till the majority of them have hatched out. before you start taking them out. I typically take mine out maybe 2 or 3 days after they've hatched. Totally fine in there. Now they're going to be hungry and thirsty, but it really helps those that haven't quite hatched out yet. So leave them in there. Don't get too overzealous and take them out. You will also want to set up your brooder ahead of time. So this could be a heat lamp, positioned correctly so you don't have any fires. Or nowadays, a lot of people are using the those heat. What do they call them? Those heat. What do they call them? Not heat pads, but you can use those type of heaters, and usually the setting for brooder and heating temperature. Box of shavings for the newspaper. Try not to use a slippery box, for instance, like a Rubbermaid tub, and then some of these materials. Baby ducks and geese have a real hard time getting grip because of those flat web feet. So we don't want them to slip and slide and kind of get splay legs. So your brooder box needs to be set up to where you have a good grip by those baby ducks and geese so they don't have that splay leg or have any other leg problems. Food and water offer a good commercial, well-balanced feed, these guys. However, goslings, they are grazers. They love grass. I found with my flock, if I can get the adults to raise their own goslings, they do so much better on fresh grass than they do on some of the just commercial feeds alone. So get those goslings some fresh grass, go pick some every day. They'll enjoy it. Also helps with behavior. So sometimes ducklings or goslings in particular, I'm sorry, get bored and they start pecking each other, biting on each other's tails. And if you have any other birds in there, they'll bite on their tails and feathers. It can cause some problems, cause some bloody tails, bloody backs. So give them that fresh grass, gives them good stimulation, keeps them busy. And they are messy. So if you ever raise ducks and geese, they're just messy all the way around. I found that ducks are worse than geese. So try to maintain a dry, clean environment, and you will have to clean it often. They will make a mess very quickly. And they grow extremely fast. Be ready for that. I affectionately say that baby ducks in particular grow overnight, and it seems like they do. With that good feed in them and the right conditions, they just grow quickly. So be prepared for that, either to move them to a larger brooder or to move them outside in a larger pen. So let's quickly go through a few incubation problems. We can have some temperature problems, returning problems, and humidity problems. So just a few examples of some temperature problems. So if we have an incubator that's too high, we're going to get embryos that fail to develop, or we call those early deads. They hatch, but have bloody or rough, unhealed navels. That can happen with too high temperature. Hatch too quickly. So again, the goal is to have all these things hatch at the same exact time. Makes management just a little bit easier. Then we have improper yolk absorption. So if they hatch and there's still yolk on the outside, that can be an indication the temperature was too high in the incubator. Kind of with the hatching too quickly, if we have a too low temp, we can have baby ducks and geese hatch late, and embryos fail to develop for early deaths or too low of temperature. Humidity. This one you can have a too high humidity, could be poorly healed navel. So here's an example of a baby duck that's got a poorly healed navel, still got a little bit of blood attached to it there. Hatched ducklings and goslings will have smeared egg contents all over them. So that sticky substance on the bottom where their navel would be, kind of all that marconium could be smeared on there if they were in there too long. Dead in the shell without pipping. This happens quite a bit, actually. So you get a duck or goose that starts to pip. You can see its bill sticking out too, and all of a sudden it just died. Right. So too much water in that incubator can actually be a bad thing. Kind of the same thing with too low humidity. We can get them dead in the shell without pipping. So they just get trapped in there, don't quite get that pip started. They pip but are dead in the shell. So you can see here's an example here of a shell membrane that's dried out. That baby duck is in there. It's trapped. And then sometimes, kind of like with the too high humidity, you'll see them with their bills sticking out and they're just dead, right? So that could be a too low or too high humidity. issue as well. I'd say most problems I see with ducks and goose hatching out is not a too high humidity problem, it's a too low humidity problem. Again, they do require that 80% humidity level, so we really don't want to get it to a point where we have these shell membranes dry out and get sticky and stick to that gosling the duckling. This happens the same with baby chicks too. Humidity is too low and you still get this shell membrane sticking to them. So if you do everything right, you should have a ton of little baby ducks and geese in your incubators. So here's my son. This is my, I'll say, a bumper crop of my tufted Roman goslings. A few years ago, he's a little older now, but so if you do everything right, you get something like this. And from my experience with ducks and geese, it can be quite difficult, right? They have quite a bit different requirements than chickens or turkeys, and you have to get everything just right. It takes years, I found, it takes years to kind of get it just right. However, I've taken gosling or duck and goose eggs to area schools. I don't know what they do. They must care for them better than I do, but they usually get a better hatch than I do, right? So, so they can be difficult, but really just monitor that temperature and humidity level carefully throughout the incubation and hatching period. Having a good trusted incubator, having good trusted thermometers. I wouldn't just trust the digital thermometer on the incubator. I actually put a physical thermometer in there that you trust to test it out, as well as a trusty hygrometer, kind of to see what the humidity level is. Don't trust that digital stuff, but make sure that they both are key to the success of your hatch. And with that, here's my information. If you want to get a hold of me, if you have any questions about duck and goose incubation. I've had some experience with swan. Swans, I don't know if you've ever had swan eggs hatch and get those cygnets growing. They're a tough thing. They have some requirements. I've tried before. They're tough. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
We have a couple of questions from Pam. What if you live in an area where the humidity is quite high most of the time? Do you just need to keep an eye on incubators since there is added heat?
Absolutely. So if you live in a high humidity area, you may not have to put any water in the incubator. It really just depends on the humidity in your house or wherever you're incubating these eggs. And if it's high enough, and hopefully it's not, you know, if you've got the 55 to 65%, that's fairly normal. But if you have, 80%, you're probably going to have to add some water. But yeah, just monitor the humidity level. If you don't have to add water, don't worry about it.
What about peacocks and pheasants, even though they're not technically waterfowl? We haven't talked about incubating them.
So I would say whatever you do for a turkey is probably what you do for peacocks and pheasants. Those requirements are very, very similar.
Imagine you could say that for all the game birds with the quail and the bob white or Japanese guinea fowl. Any of those, although guinea fowl have really thick eggshells. I wonder how that affects it.
And the only thing different about peacocks and pheasants in terms of their out of the shell requirements is the higher protein feed. So they are game birds. You can't feed them the same thing you feed a baby chick or a baby duck goose. They have to have that 28-30% protein feed.
Right.
Yep.
Any other questions while you're thinking about them? I will put our website in the chat box. We also have a Facebook page. If you go to our website, you can see the past webinars as well as upcoming webinars. Our next webinar is doing fecal flotation. So if you are concerned about worms in your birds of any kind, Dr. Frame from Utah will be looking at doing a fecal flotation just like you would do for dogs and cats, but specifically for poultry. We also have there's nothing in July. August, we're looking at sanitizing a poultry house, and then September, organizing a county poultry show if you are in charge of that. Then respiratory issues, designing a small poultry house, and managing a poultry flock on pasture. So we have lots of interesting upcoming ones and lots of great past ones that have been recording. Are we moving to Thursday instead of Tuesday? No, we will be staying on Tuesdays. This one was different because of Brett's availability. He was not available on our first Tuesday of the month, but he was available on Thursday. So that was why we changed this month. But all other months, we will be returning to the first Tuesday. Lauren asked, have you seen a lot more difficulties with hatching call ducks, or have any suggestions around them? Seems to be a struggle we face thanks to that tiny bill.
Yes, yeah, so we have bred those things to have tiny little bills, big old heads, and it's really hard for them to get out. So I would say with those, and again, there's so many call breeders and every single one's gonna have a different way of doing it, but I would say stick to the normal temperature and humidity levels for those. A lot of that just comes out just the phenotype, the structure of those birds. This might be an instance where you really have to watch those things. If they start to really struggle, like if they go for a long time without nothing happening, you might have to go in just because of the size of those heads and those bills to help them out. Now, there will be some breeders that they have absolutely no problem doing it. I was just talking to one earlier today. She was mentioning increasing the niacin level in her feed to help with those baby ducks. So I don't know if there's a lot of validity to that, but that is a struggle. Another one we struggle with too, in terms of their phenotype and how they are structurally built, is crested ducks. And I unfortunately have those too. The crest, the big old knob on their head, is a hindrance for them to get out. So we really just have to watch those very closely. Plus, there's a lethal gene with the crested gene. So you can have ducklings that just don't survive because of the lethal gene. So
what about the knobs on some of the geese then?
Those aren't as bad because it's not as pronounced yet.
Okay.
Yep. So with the crested duck, I mean they got a crest right there already. So their skull is formed as a little dome. Yep. So it's hard for it to get out. But yeah, like the Africans and the Chinas, the geese, that knob doesn't come in until later in life. So they usually don't propagate that.
That's good to know.
Yep.
I've obviously never hatched out ducks.
It's tough. I should have, hopefully when I get home, I should have some baby ducks hatching out when I get home, unless I screwed up the date. But yeah, they're a little bit different. I can hatch chickens like popcorn. I mean, they can just pop right out. But ducks, these are a little bit tougher.
Yeah. It's always the way it goes.
Yep.
Whatever you want to do is hard.
Yep.
So, we still have lots of time. If you want to, anybody wants to ask any more questions.
One question I get every once in a while, Jackie, is can I incubate ducks and chickens together? And
I get that sometimes too, yeah.
Yep. So based on the temperature, that's fine. Temperature requirements for a duck and a chicken are exact same. Obviously, humidity is gonna be a little bit of a challenge because chickens will incubate between 45% and about, I say 60 to 65%. I like to have that 65 mark is gonna be your hatching temperature, or a percentage, I mean, for humidity. Whereas in ducks and geese, that's your incubation temp. So be prepared to have, if you want to have ducks and geese in the same incubator and hatch at the same time, be prepared to have ducklings and goslings that probably are going to be a little bit humidity deficient. They're not going to be able to, might have more problems with that sticky membrane. Whereas chickens at 65% is perfect. So if you can have a separate incubator, Or what you could do is you start the chicken eggs. Or see how I would do the math on this. So you start the ducks a week after the chickens. That way the chickens hatch first, then the ducks and geese hatch the next week. That way you can control the humidity level just a little bit better.
Well, if you hatched them, if you didn't hatch them in your setter, that would that would help a little bit too. So you could incubate them together and then separate out the chickens to hatch in a separate hatcher, and then move the ducks, because that humidity at the hatch can make a big difference.
Yep. And I don't recommend hatching baby chicks at that 75-80% humidity, because then you can get some humidity problems there. Some water droplets in the air cell, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we don't want that either.
Yeah, we don't recommend mixing species in an incubator just because of incubation condition differences. Can you talk more about bulb humidity? Share that graphic again. Walk through why that works and what the numbers mean when you use bulb humidity.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm assuming this is what the slide you were talking about.
Yeah,
so,
I think so. Yeah.
Yep. So your dry bulb temperature is your actual incubator temperature. That's the one that you want at 99.5 degrees. Okay. However, when you add water to that, you're going to slightly decrease that temperature a little bit. Okay. So, and I don't know, as Jackie, you might know more about this and how to really describe this, but use this wet bulb temp as a good indication of your humidity level. Okay. So this is going to be a lot more humid, obviously, than this is going to be because of that water. Okay. This is the old tried and true method of determining humidity. And I think there's a chart somewhere.
There's a chart, but when the wet bulb is in the water, you reduce the temperature that the thermometer reads because of the evaporation of the water on the bulb. So that takes the temperature down, and it's the difference between the two that on a chart will tell you relative humidity. That's why it's relative humidity. Any other questions? Because the amount of water that the atmosphere can hold will depend on the temperature. So if the dry bulb temperature changes, it's going to, of course, change the wet bulb as well. But the amount of moisture that air can hold is different depending on the actual dry bulb temperature.
Another thing I just thought of too, and I bet you guys talked about it last week. I'll go back to here. Is these incubators here? So the forced air and still air, the ventilation with these. It seems like because you want to increase humidity, you should leave these ventilation holes, little red plugs here, basically shut. However, you really need that good clean air circulation in there. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, from day 1 to day 28, right? Because these ducklings and goslings are still breathing inside that egg. So if we have stale air and you have it filled with carbon dioxide, you're going to get early deads, or you're going to get ducklings and goslings that start to hatch out and then just get asphyxiated because there's too much carbon dioxide, right? So it is good to open up these red plugs, for instance, on these incubators or whatever incubator you're using, increase the ventilation, and then increase your humidity at the same time.
Just looking for a relative humidity chart. If you Google relative humidity, it will give you a chart that uses that. But a lot of times the things will just tell you a wet bulb and a dry bulb temperature. They won't even deal with the chart. Any other questions before we end? So as I said before, this was being recorded, still is, and the recording will be up probably later tonight, early tomorrow at the latest. I have to go supervise some undergrads writing an exam. So I'll be tied up with that, but I'll do it as soon as I get back. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions, I'm sure Brett would be willing to help them with that, or you can go to our website and use the Ask Extension feature, which I'm told I have to fix, or you can email me directly on any topic that if I can't answer, we'll send to whoever spoke on that particular topic. So thank you all for coming. Hope to see you next week. Thank you, Brett. You did a great job once again.
Thank you, Jackie.
Hope you get a good hatch of your ducks.
Oh, I sure hope so.
Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.